Great. Good morning, everybody. Glad to have you joining us again for another edition of Monday Morning Human Intelligence. So we've got a great live webcast going for you today, and I appreciate Rebecca working with me to set these up. We have a new friend. I have a new friend. It's an older friend for Rebecca, Dorman Bazzell. And Rebecca is going to give us a quick introduction to Dorman in a second, and then we'll talk to him about connectedness in a data-rich world. So we're going to do sort of what we've adopted as our standard approach for these events. We have a solid 30-minute time limit. We're going to spend some time having a conversation. We're going to talk about data and how it connects to people, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions. So the chat is open. There's also, in those of you that are on our Slack channel, you can put comments there in Slack, and we'll work to bring those out as well and bring them up during the discussion. And we look forward to having a great 30 minutes together. So Rebecca, thank you for working with me on this. And if you don't mind, please introduce everyone to your friend and my new friend.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to have Dorman join us today as our guest speaker. He is a friend of mine, and he is the first ever Chief Data Officer of the state of North Dakota. And I'm going to keep my intro brief. So one of his primary focuses right now is to create platforms for data to be secure, usable, and very relevant to this conversation, valuable. So very excited to see where this discussion takes us. Thanks, Dorman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me some time to spend some time with you, have a conversation in a very hectic time for humanity. So as introduced, I am the Chief Data Officer for the state of North Dakota, and I spend a lot of my time, as you can imagine, in the D portion of my title. It's not just moving data or even just using data, but I spend a lot of time thinking about such topics as data lineage. That is, how do we know where the data came from? How do I know I can trust that data? Data quality. Is the data actually usable? Will it, if I ask it a question, can it actually help me get to an answer? And then metadata, where how do users know which data they're supposed to use? All that sounds quite dry, and I get it. But when you're in a COVID world, all of a sudden, those conversations and then the intensity of them, they take on a completely different shift and a completely different way of thinking about it. So when you think about all of that data, you have to understand, especially in a COVID world, you have to understand how much testing have we done? How many people have died? What's our rate of infection? What's our hospital bed utilization? Because all of those things become very important so that we can safely and efficiently open our state, keep it open, and manage it in a post-COVID world, whatever post-COVID functionally means these days. So the point is that data allows us to ask the better questions, right? It allows us to ask the deeper and harder questions. And as my daughter said in 8th grade, that everything is true if you don't ask questions. And she got it right, even at that young age. Data's been described as the new oil. It's very deep and broad across the entire fabric of our work, our lives, and our experiences. And it goes deep and broad. Oftentimes, we don't make distinction between what we know and how we know it. If you're skeptical, let me give you a couple of examples. How many of you know your bank account balance? How many of you know your resting heart rate? How many LinkedIn connections do you have, and how well do you know those LinkedIn connections beyond what's listed in the bios? How many of you found that significant other at a site or a bar because they like the same whiskey or a vodka martini as you do? And most importantly, maybe, what do you find valuable? Believe it or not, it really is all data. And I'm going to help you, hopefully help you see that it's different kinds of data. We use that data to live, we use it to predict. Again, if I don't get my gas now, right? If I don't fill up my tank now, I predict that I will not make it downtown for lunch. If I don't buy eggs now, I can predict that my kids aren't going to have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow morning. So it's predictive as well. But what happens when it's no longer predictive? What happens, just like with COVID, when you can no longer predict what's going to happen tomorrow? What happens when that data set that you've relied on is completely rewritten to support the health and well-being of your citizens and even of yourself? What happens when you can no longer predict that Saturday morning, I'll be out mowing grass just like I was last Saturday? And that's exactly what happened to me on Friday, May 15th in 2006. My Saturday would not be spent mowing grass, but would rather be recovering from an 11-hour surgery to reattach my left hand. The nature of how I lived, interacted, and connected with people in my experiences, all of that data would fundamentally be rewritten and fundamentally change. You can read that story on the internet, but what I really wanted to share with you was really kind of the so what of that experience. So before that date, everything that I did was kind of thrown all into the same bucket of experience. I just kind of saw everything as being one big bucket of stuff. And it wasn't that I didn't live, love, laugh like everyone else. I had a great time. I had a great life. It's just that I observed it and experienced it all pretty much as the same thing. Now, if that sounds bad, it's really because it is. For example, examine your own lives. Is the predicted revenue model for your next product launch consciously or unconsciously similar to what you predict you'll have for dinner this evening? It's an intriguing question, because that's exactly how a lot of us have looked at life in the past. It's exactly how a lot of us still continue to live. The difference is that now I think about this, all of this connectedness in this data-rich world. There's a difference. There's an existent data set that tells you one thing about your product launch. Then you can measure that, and it sits in a database. It sits in spreadsheets, right? It's physical data that you can look, touch, see, and feel. But yet there's this other data set around who we are as people and how we connect with each other. That's a fundamentally different data set. And that's how I've begun to think about this data in this data-rich world. I now simply see connectedness and consciousness as very different data sets. They have to be curated, managed, and integrated into my life in different ways. I don't manage these by spreadsheets, by the way, right? I know this all sounds really cold, and it may sound really complicated, but once you've gone through an experience like this, what you begin to see is that you don't need these spreadsheets to manage your life this way, that you begin to see a different bucket of experience, a different way of looking at data that helps you understand these different experiences and connectedness in your life. And it's really important today, right? We have, because of COVID, right, we have this distancing. We have this way of looking at things that's fundamentally different than, is that me, by the way, is that me doing that? It could be, I think my you're doing, iPad here.
No, you're doing okay. Great. But I would like to.
I'm just my screen is flickering, and I wasn't sure if that was me doing that or.
I don't see it.
No, you're doing great.
All right, I think it was my iPad sitting on my my keyboard up here.
But I would like to pull at one thing, if you don't mind, for a second. So I love what you said about a lot of your job is about what we know and how we know it. And here is part of human intelligence. That goes directly to critical thinking when we talk about what is knowledge and being able to ensure that we can count on that knowledge. So for you in your work and your personal life, how do you sort of separate knowledge from things that your mind makes up, either because you want to believe or because of the cognitive biases that we all have? How do you sort of make that distinction for yourself to ensure that you're making decisions based off of knowledge and not something else?
I'm going to since I come from the world of consulting, I'm going to tell you it depends, right? So sure. If I think about things like UFO conspiracy theories, I love it, right? It's not based on fact. It's just a lot of fun. I watch them on YouTube occasionally. I just find it fun to watch. So I just enjoy the experience of that, even though it's not based on science and fact. And some people will say it is, and that's fine by me, but I don't believe it is at this point, right? But I enjoy the experience of that. And so I integrate that into my life as part of just fun,
Mhm.
right? When it comes to things like again, infection rates, or more importantly with COVID, right, hospital bed utilization rates. Right now it becomes singularly important, right? We can't take it for granted. We have to have, it actually has to be factual, right? We have to verify that information, right? We have to verify that information with our partners in the hospital, in the private world, right? We have to understand what is our infection rate at our most vulnerable areas, maybe in the assisted living homes, right? So we have to have really rock solid optics around all of that data because people's lives depend on it. So those are kinds of both ends of that spectrum, right? And for one of those, I will go through a really exhaustive search to make sure that we've got the right data. For the other one, it's YouTube. I turn it on, I turn it off, I enjoy it, and it goes away, right?
So I guess at the beginning of your data process and your data journey, you have to figure out, what is something that you can rely on. But at the end of doing all of the analysis and the work with data is something that actually impacts people's lives. And that's, I think, exactly what you're talking about here. How do you work to communicate that data to people who are not as data experienced as you and maybe the folks in your office are?
Yeah, great question. So again, I think it depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're communicating that data to the governor, right, that data has to be, first of all, again, has to be accurate, right? The data has to know that he can trust that data. And so communicating it to him, we communicate it in two ways. Here's what the data is telling you, and here's the so what. Here's what that means, right? Hospital bed utilization is going up. What does that mean? That means we have less hospital beds, but it means our infection rates are climbing as well, right? It means that we may want to think about ordering more ventilators. We may want to think about alternative places in North Dakota, in Bismarck, where I live, where we may want to open a hospital wing, right? A new channel for dealing with patients. If you're communicating that to the general public, right, what you don't want to do is create panic from all of that data, right? So you don't want to lie, you don't want to mislead, but you want to communicate that in a different way. You want to communicate it as our hospital rate is climbing, but guess what, folks? We've got 10,000 hospital beds. We're now at 1,000. We predict that over the next 6 months, we'll see that spike to about 5,000. Therefore, our delta is 5,000. We have plenty of capacity, right? We communicate, we're increasing our testing, right? So we can understand what's our rate of infection. Are they climbing? Are they reducing? If they're climbing, what is that? How might that impact our hospital bed utilization?
No, yeah, I think that's great. I appreciate that. And I think Rebecca has a question about trusting data. So Rebecca, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I know it's very relevant right now, especially during COVID. How can you communicate to people who aren't as data driven or centric as you are to trust what you're providing with your data, right? So how do we know the data is accurate? How can we trust you with that and the message and the value that you're deriving from the data? That's a tough question, isn't it?
Well, it's an interesting question because one of the things that we keep trying to push with our citizens is give us accurate data, right? So the more accurate the data that we have about you, the better we can use that data to help you. So if you think about a state, right? A state has a moral obligation to manage its citizens' data. We have a moral obligation to fully protect that data. What we also need our citizens to do is have the moral obligation to help themselves, right? So the better the data that they can provide us, the better off we can help respond to not just COVID, but just any services that citizens for the state need. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it did. And so I guess that's even more deeply rooted to then you have to in turn trust that they're providing you with accurate data. So it's definitely a two-way street when it comes to trust and communication there. And I can only imagine how difficult that must be. But yeah, I'd answered it.
Okay.
So I really appreciate you bringing that out as well, that it's not only that the citizens need to trust the data that you provide, but you need to have, they need to trust that you're going to handle that data well, right? That you are handling data about them personally and about their own activities, and in a world where we all have a smartphone that provides a tremendous amount of information about each of us. You have a duty to maintain that information. So it's interesting, and I haven't heard anyone really address the role of trust on both sides of the coin for living in a data connected world. So I'm curious about how you work to build that trust, or to be worthy of that trust with your citizens.
Yeah. So some of this actually has to do with connectedness. So one of the things that we have to do as IT is we sit down with our legislators, we sit down with commissioners of the individual agencies, and we talk about things like cybersecurity. We have a really extensive cybersecurity model for the state, but that doesn't ring well with a lot of legislators. They don't get cybersecurity, and it's not that they're dumb, right? It's just that it's a pretty crazy thing to have to try and dig through and understand. So what we have to do is we have to build connectedness with our legislators and trust with our legislators. So we talk about things like getting 5 million attacks per month in the state of North Dakota. And we talk about how we are protecting that. And by the way, that number has, I think, doubled, if not tripled, since COVID has started.
Wow.
So we talk to them, we message to them about how we understand the value of data, how we understand the value of data privacy. I worked with one of our legislators last year on a bill around data privacy. So we partner with them to help them understand it, right? So that's one set of messaging. The other set of messaging is that what we take to the street, right? What we take to the citizens, and we tell them kind of the same message, right, that we give to our legislators. We have a moral obligation to protect your data. We are going to protect your data. You can give it to us. You can be rest assured that we're going to manage it, isolate it, and make sure that you're protected so that you continue to receive the services that you need, that your tax dollars are being well spent. It's not just technology for the sake of technology.
No, thank you for that. It's always, or it's been surprising to me about how many of these discussions we have around human intelligence goes back to trust, whether it's trust in collaborating with your team members, or trust in the data that you are providing, or trust that people are going to handle your data well. So I appreciate that. We have some great questions that are coming in the chat, and there's an observation that JW Womack made just a few minutes ago about really getting to asking the right question. And one of the quotes that I like is from Goethe, which is, "If you want a wise answer, ask a reasonable question." So I'm curious about you and sort of the process that you and your team goes through to make sure that you're actually asking the question that you need to answer.
So the way we have been approaching this is, and I will tell you, this is maturing. There's a maturity curve here, even for me, in this process. But what we really have started doing is we start with outcomes. And that is, what outcomes do we believe we need to achieve? Maybe it's to provide a service for a new service for our citizens. Maybe it's to an outcome that we need to provide more hospital beds. So we start with outcomes, and then we walk backwards from outcomes, and we start asking questions. And as we ask questions, we may refine what our outcome needs to be. And so eventually we get down to a point where we can identify, do we even have the data to answer the questions to achieve the outcomes?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Mind if I say one quick thing in there?
Yeah, please.
About the outcome? Okay, so not to bring up the state of Florida or anything, but I am. Do you find that if you do have an outcome in mind and you walk backwards and then you have to adjust your outcome, is that difficult to do because you're biased with the outcome you had already envisioned?
When I came here to the state 2 years ago, 2 years in October, and when I came to the state in October, that would have been seen as failure. And the cultural change that we've tried to make over the past 2 years as a group of chiefs who are all four out of 5 of us are not from state government, but we've tried to change the culture and shift it to the point where it's okay to ask questions or to create outcomes that are wrong, right? That's how you know you're getting to the right outcome, right? Again, my daughter Emma is actually on the phone, right, and on this call, and she is the one who came up with the if you don't ask good questions, you won't get good answers. There she is. Hi, Em.
Hi, Emma.
But she was spot on, and that is that we're asking better questions of the people we work with. We're trying to ask better questions of our governor, of our legislators, so that we can get to better outcomes, right? So is it today? I would say it's seen as less of a stigma. It's less of a failure, if you will. It's more of a, yeah, we didn't get that right. Good thing we asked those questions about that outcome. One of the things that we use, by the way, a tool that we use is it's OKRs, objectives and key results. So if you're not familiar with that model, it's as simple as that model looks. When you read through it, it can be quite daunting to work through those models.
So I'm curious if you don't mind telling us. So what sort of changed that culture over time? What changed the culture to one where people can make mistakes, where the entire process can lead to a mistake, but you're able to recover from that and keep working?
Yeah, really good question. So I think one of the things that we as the chiefs have tried to do is break down doors, meaning that if anybody at any time can call me, the chain of command is purely there because we always have, each of us have a different role and we have different responsibilities. In terms of communication, that's all gone, right? Anyone from anywhere in the state can pick up the phone, call me and talk to me. No one has to go to their supervisor and say, hey, I want to talk to Dorman, right?
Right.
And so some of those conversations, right? Rightly, they'll be held in confidence, and we talk about that and set that expectation. Other times it's merely just questions. Hey, Dorman, I want to get involved in the work that you guys are doing around data privacy or artificial intelligence. So, pulling people in by letting them know there's an open door, letting them know that there are no more walls. And occasionally I still have to remind some of my team members that people do not have to tell you they're talking to me. It's none of your business if they want to talk to me.
Right. So it seems like trust is coming up again in that discussion, that the folks that you're working with need to trust you. You need to trust them, that they are being responsible, trustworthy actors, and then the folks in the middle have to also trust that everyone's working for the greater good and doing things that are promoting the value for the citizens and value for everyone there.
So maybe to add on to that just a little bit. So one of the things that I think that COVID has helped has been this idea of the virtual model, right? Because prior to COVID, prior to I think March 13th, everybody in state government sat in an office that they'd been sitting in for the past 18, 20 years. Right now, we have essentially shut down most of our offices. And there's a lot of conversation about whether or not we're selling off some of those buildings, whether or not we're even going back to those offices. Mm-hmm. And what has shifted over time is that a lot of people thought the 6-foot social distancing also meant isolation, even on Teams, right? You see people right. who they wouldn't turn on their video, right? And they would not really become part of the conversation. Now that social distancing has created a new dynamic, and that dynamic is, oh, wait a minute, I've got a voice here too, and I can be on these calls just like anyone else, and people can see me. We as chiefs try and set an example. We always have our videos on, and more people are turning on their videos. As they turn on their videos, what we're seeing is an increased engagement from those individuals. And so it's not just one thing, right? COVID has actually done some amazing things to help shift the culture, especially in North Dakota, and have allowed people to really become a voice and have a part in the narrative.
Yeah, that's great. And yes, absolutely, seeing people's faces is important. Just even in these calls, being able to not speak into an abyss and actually have humans looking back at you is really powerful. So we've got just about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to try to weave together a few questions at the same time. So one of the questions that Donna brings up is essentially that data isn't biased, but the people who collect data and the people who interpret data, we certainly have unconscious biases that impact that. So how do you, and connecting it with a question from Corey Cannon, how do you sort of validate that data and do your best to try to remove those unconscious biases from the data that you're working with to ensure that those don't propagate into your solutions?
Great question. By the way, I would argue that data can be biased, but we can have a different conversation about that. How do we do that? So again, going back to kind of the D in my title, one of the things that I'm responsible for in the governance world, the data governance world, is making sure that any models that we produce do no harm. So we have a couple of things that I've been working on with my team. One of them is a do no harm data privacy policy around acceptable use of data with the university system. We're integrating that model, or at least portions of it, into the rest of the state, into the work that we're doing. As part of our data science team, we're developing models, and we're developing a model of a model that actually does exactly what you're talking about, that where under peer review, we're constantly reviewing those models that we developed, that data, and we're looking for exactly what you're talking about. So for example, one of the simple things that we do in the state is, because we have a lack of population density, right? We only have 750,000 people in the whole state. So in 77,000 square miles, we have 750,000 people. We have to constantly be aware of low cell counts when we're doing reporting, so that we're not identifying a single individual. So that's just one of the very simple ways that we do this, right? One of the things I will say too is that the people that I'm very privileged to work with, who are these data science individuals, either on my team or spread throughout the rest of the state, very cognizant of the fact that bias in data has impacts. Why? Again, because of low population density, you may be talking about your neighbor. So you have to be, and everybody knows your neighbor. Go to the grocery store here. Everybody knows everybody. You have to be very aware of those biases in your models and in your data.
So thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that's another good example of trust continuing, and also the value of collaboration, right? That working in a peer review model, right? A peer review is essentially collaboration, so that people can bring up questions and ensure that those get sorted out. So I appreciate that. So you only have about 1 minute left. So I'm curious, like as you walk around and you go about your daily life, what are maybe some informal pieces of data that you like to just collect when you're walking around, as you maybe, like I try to notice how many people are wearing masks, for instance, just as I am in the grocery store. Is there anything that you pay attention to just in your daily life? And I didn't leave you very much time for an answer, so sorry.
Yeah, great question. Since I live on the prairie, I'm constantly looking for bison, elk, coyotes, those types of animals. Less concerned about the mask side of it. I usually wear a mask when I'm indoors, but less so when I'm outdoors. I try and get tuned into my team to understand, how are they doing, right? What are the data points? How are they feeling about working from home? How are they feeling? Do they feel connected?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great, right? Connecting back with humans, and that's what we're all about. So I really appreciate your time here. There's tons of questions that are coming into the chat, and we will look to put these on on our Slack as well. If you are not a member of our Slack, please send me a note and I will connect you and put you there so that you're on, and we'll continue to get the discussion going. Thank you very much for your time, Dorman. We're out of time today. I really appreciate it and look forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks, Rebecca, for setting it up. Everyone, have a good
Thank you all.
have a great week, and we'll see you next time. So Dorman, if you don't mind